Outside of those legendary strikers that we're all able to name off the top of our head, like R9, Henry, Ibrahimovic, Van Basten, Muller, Pele, those guys, it's very easy for us as football fans to fail to give more credit than what's deserved to strikers who had generational runs. And one footballer who's really the epitome of this is El Tigre Radamel Falcao. First things first, if you don't even know who Falcao is or what he's done, then you're really little bro and Unky needs to tell you some stories. But jokes aside, Radamel Falcao was a player who at one point felt like he was destined to take the mantle of best striker of the generation. Nowadays, we often say we're starved for proper strikers who epitomize the number 9 position. Well, Falcao is almost as pure of a striker as you can get. His ability to run off defenders, his quick burst of pace, his incredible eye for goal, his heading ability at just a height of 5'10", made him such a lethal finisher in and around the box. It was never a question of if Falcao was gonna score, but rather when and how, as I felt like he was capable of getting on the end of anything and making a goal out of it. For Falcao, I genuinely felt like there was a period where he was the best striker in the world. And yet, despite all the praise I'm giving the guy, if I had to ask you to name me, let's say, 15 of the best strikers since the 2000s, what are the odds you would have given me the name Falcao back? I know for sure I would have gotten names like Drogba, Torres, Cavani, Higuain, but I can't help but feel like Falcao does not get the same love as some of those guys get. And look, by no stretch of the imagination am I saying that Falcao deserved to be called the greatest striker of all time, or even the greatest striker since the 2000s, because that would be a very big reach. However, it just pains me to see a player like Falcao, who showed us exactly what he was capable of, not get the flowers that he deserves. And granted, Falcao, like many others, faced some setbacks which probably led to his omission from these type of conversations. It's just, given how Falcao rose to glory, it's really a shame to see. But we're here today to give this guy his flowers, damn it. And of course, boys, real quick, if you're new to the channel enjoying the content, don't forget to leave a like, comment, subscribe. We're dropping weekly football videos, so don't forget to hit the noti bell so you don't miss an upload. And of course, if you're not new to the channel, boys, welcome back. I'm glad to have you around for another video. But with that being said, let's get into the rise and fall of El Tigre Falcao. Of course, first things first, we have to talk about his rise up, which honestly wasn't as straight up as many other footballers, probably due to the fact that he's Colombian. Falcao technically got his start in professional football at just the age of 13 at Lanceros Boyacá in Colombia's second division. However, he moved to River Plate at the age of 19, which would really help his career. Moving to one of the biggest clubs in Latin America, and arguably the biggest club in Argentina, would help Falcao get a lot more attention. Not only would he be playing better opposition in Argentina, but he would also be able to take part in competitions like Copa Libertadores, which always helps really talented South American players get recognized abroad. Falcao would become a regular for River in the 2005 Apertura season, where he would impress his manager enough to become a mainstay. It helped a lot that he was able to score 7 goals in 7 games, including scoring multiple braces. So, in the first season for the club, Falcao would injure his ACL in a match against San Lorenzo, which would see him miss the rest of the 2005 Apertura season, as well as the entire 2006 Clausura and Copa Libertadores. Falcao would eventually return to the squad and would continue to show the potential that he did have. At this stage of his career, it really felt like there was just a matter of time before he really took those steps to propel himself forward. He would have stop-start moments for River, as he never really had insane scoring numbers, but when he would shine, it would be impossible to ignore. In the 2007 season, Falcao would be crucial in a Copa Libertadores comeback against Botafogo, where a hat-trick in the second leg of this tie helped River advance 4-3 on aggregate, and he would follow up this performance by scoring in River's win against their biggest rival, Boca Juniors. The 2008 Clausura campaign would be a good one for El Tigre, as he would go on to be crowned champion of Argentina with River, who, fun fact, were being managed by Diego Simeone. It was around this time in Falcao's career where reports of interest from Europe crept up, and like I said, I'd be lying to you if I said that Falcao had insane goal scoring numbers and he was tearing the league apart, but ultimately his natural poacher ability was very hard to ignore. It was reported that clubs like AC Milan, Man United, Aston Villa, and Arsenal all had interest in the young Colombian. However, he would ultimately stay at River for at least one more calendar year, and in this year he would find himself coming last place with River in the 2008 Apertura season and 8th place in the 2009 Clausura, having clearly shown improvement from when he first joined the club and accumulating 35 goals in his final 2 years with River. The move to Europe finally arrived. On July 13, 2009, Porto signed Radamel Falcao for just about 5.5 million euros. Porto had just sold off Lisandro Lopez, so they needed a replacement, and Falcao was their man. Having just won the league and looking to maintain their position at the top, Falcao was expected to fill in that vacancy and maintain the standard of the club. And given, like I said, Falcao's goal scoring record wasn't spectacular up to that point, Porto somewhat took a risk on the then 23-year-old, but boy did he pay back in dividends. Falcao would pretty much hit the ground running, as he would score in 4 straight games to start off the season. season. The guy came in and instantly made the league his own. He would go on to register 34 goals and 10 assists in 43 appearances in his first campaign, which included multiple vital goals in many league matches, as well as goals in multiple games against Atletico Madrid in the Europa League. Falcao would also be crucial in Porto acquiring the Taça de Portugal win that season. The next season at Porto for Falcao would see him carry his form, as he would go ahead and register 38 goals and 7 assists in 42 games. And for those with the keen eye, you would see that Falcao scored 17 goals in 14 Europa League games in a run which Porto would end up champions of. Falcao would score multiple hat-tricks and even had a 4-goal performance in this run as well. This is well and truly the season where it felt like a rocket had been strapped to the back of Falcao and there was just going to be no stopping him. He did have an injury at Porto this season that saw him miss some games, but given how well he did, it didn't matter. Ultimately, Falcao and Porto would end up as Portuguese champions this season, and after this masterclass campaign, Falcao was a hot commodity. It was clear that he was bound to move up from Porto. As great as Porto is in Portugal, great players who come through the club will eventually end up leaving at one point or another. And despite extending his contract with Porto after this season, Atletico Madrid would sign Falcao for 40 million euros on August 18th, 2011. And when you deep it as well, this was probably the perfect place for Falcao to go to really strengthen his career moving forward. Atletico, above all else at that point, have been able to produce great strikers like Sergio Aguero, Fernando Torres, and Diego Forlan. So Falcao signing gave the Atletico Madrid fans a hope that they had just found themselves another gem. And that's exactly what they just got a hold of. In his very first season for Los Colchoneros, he would go on to register another 36 goals and 6 assists in 50 appearances, a campaign which once again saw multiple league hat-tricks. And for the second season in a row, Falcao would have a jaw-dropping Europa League campaign, which would see him come out as a champion once again. This guy had just dragged 2 separate teams to Europa League glory in back-to-back seasons. Falcao had well and truly announced himself to the world with this season. Prior to this, despite how amazing he really was, there was always a question of if he could do it in a bigger European league. And he didn't even skip a beat with his first feature in Spain. Then the craziest thing is, for how good his first season with Atletico Madrid was, it was so nice he had to do it twice. In the second campaign for the club, he would go on to register 34 goals and 3 assists across 41 games. At this point, Falcao was well and truly the best striker in the world. In fact, after his first campaign with the club, which I forgot to mention actually, Falcao had been put into the FIFA Pro World 11, which truly stamped his authority as a top striker. So essentially, he followed up winning this award with another phenomenal season. So you could see why I'm saying this guy was genuinely the best striker in world football in this time period. And in that second season for Atleti, notable performances included a hat-trick against Champions League winning Chelsea in the Super Cup, 5 goals against Deportivo La Coruña, and an assist against Real Madrid in the Copa del Rey final, amongst having just a generally great season. Falcao had reached a level where he left no room for anyone to question his ability. He pretty much had become 10 times the player that originally left River for Porto, and it was an absolute joy to see. And yet, for as well as it was going for Falcao at Atleti, it felt like his heart wasn't necessarily set to stay there, and ultimately his time at the club would be pretty short-lived. And in a shock turn of events, AS Monaco would sign Falcao on May 31st, 2013 for around 60 million euros. And this isn't necessarily the Monaco that we know now. This was a freshly promoted Monaco side that was backed by very wealthy owners and was attempting to make inroads in French football. And how were they looking to do this? Well, splashing the cash, of course. This window for Monaco would see them bring in Falcao, Berbatov, Ricardo Carvalho, James Rodriguez, Moutinho, Abidal, a young Anthony Martial, and Kondogbia. They had the cash to spend at Monaco, and among all these other names that they were bringing in, Falcao was absolutely vital for their plan. And at first, this would seemingly work out for Monaco, as through the first 21 games of the season, Falcao would feature in 17 and score 9 goals, which although did not match his prior pace, it wasn't too bad when considering he was joining a team with little chemistry in a new league. He did suffer a hamstring injury which saw him miss a couple of games, but little did we know that was not even going to be even remotely close to how bad it was going to get for Falcao. On January 22nd, 2014, Monaco would play a match in the Coupe de France, which was strike disaster for El Tigre, as he would suffer an ACL injury that was essentially the beginning of the end. Of course, this would see Falcao miss the rest of the season, and given Falcao's profile, it wasn't very clear how exactly he was going to be able to recover from this. Being a player that's known for explosive accelerations, his jumping ability, his physical presence, an ACL injury would prove to be catastrophic. On top of this would also see him miss the 2014 World Cup, which would have been a great opportunity for Falcao to dominate and take Colombia on a deep run. Imagine if James Rodriguez had a healthy Falcao to work with that tournament. Things would have been lit up and spooky. I remember hearing the news of Falcao's ACL tear I just had a feeling that it was going to be over for him. And nowadays, ACL tears don't really feel too drastic because even though players are really racking them up, unfortunately, it seems like they tend to recover a little bit quicker, be it due to sports science or whatever it might be. Back then, an ACL tear pretty much was a signal for the end. And that's exactly what happened, because this was well and truly pretty much the beginning of the end for Falcao. For Monaco, it was an interesting period because they didn't know exactly what to do with Falcao, who obviously needed time to recover and might or might not be the same player he was before. So for Monaco, they would send Falcao on a season-long loan to where else but Manchester United. And this is very often regarded as one of the worst transfers generally for Manchester United. Even though he was a loan, so he technically didn't cost the club any transfer fees, but he was taking up a lot of wages. He was joining United at a time where Fergie had just left a couple of seasons ago at that point. We had just went through David Moyes, and we were kind of going through a transfer window where we were pushing aggressively for big name targets to build up a great roster. Also while letting a lot of talent who had came up through the Fergie era, who was considered dead wood, leave the club. So that transfer window also saw us bring in Di Maria, Luke Shaw, Herrera, Marcos Rojo, and of course Falcao. And you would imagine you have Falcao at this club with the likes of Di Maria, and you still have other great players there. Surely he would be able to kick on, make a name for himself in the Premier League, and the player that United got was just a massive shell of his former self. Falcao would only be able to register 4 goals and 5 assists across 29 games in all competition, missing a handful of matches for either just not being in the squad or going on as an unused substitute. This loan spell was really just a disaster for Falcao. Despite those 4 goals, despite those 5 assists, it was well and truly established that Falcao was nowhere near the player he was before the ACL tear. And granted, United was pretty bad that season generally. It's not all falling on Falcao, and that I don't want to say that by any stretch of the imagination, but there was hope that at least Falcao would come in and provide something new for the club. In the one season that he was there, he had an opportunity, and unfortunately for him and unfortunately for United, it was a complete disaster as a whole. And unfortunately for Falcao, once the season was over, Monaco would once again throw him to the wolves. As for the next season, he would join Chelsea on another season-long loan, returning to the Premier League where people already had considered him a flop. So okay, benefit of the doubt, you give him another season in the Premier League, this time in a new club, different environment. Hopefully he can get going and make things happen. And unfortunately for Tigre, again, he had just probably one of the worst seasons of his life where he probably just wants to forget what happened. He would go on to only play 12 games for Chelsea that season, scoring 1 goal, as he would unfortunately miss pretty much the entire season due to a groin injury. Once he did return from injury, he had little to no place in the squad and just didn't really feature. As I mentioned, once he had the ACL tear, it was pretty established that this might just be the end for Falcao. After a loan season with United where he played terribly, only registered 4 goals, and then a second loan season with Chelsea where he only managed to play 12 games and missed pretty much the entire season due to an injury. This was pretty much the point where Falcao had gone from hero, world-class, phenomenal, best striker in the world to literally just a scrub. His reputation was on the floor, and it was going to take something massive to rescue it, if it could even happen. So after these 2 terrible seasons that Falcao probably wanted to just forget, he would eventually return to Monaco to essentially see out the rest of his time there. And credit to him, he actually was able to turn things around to an extent. Falcao would go on to have 3 good seasons for the club where he would really push on and try his best to show to the world that he was not going to be done, and he was going to push on and show the resilience that he had shown us before. And in these seasons, he would go on a great Champions League run with Monaco that really saw them draw a lot of headlines. They would manage to win a Ligue 1 win over PSG, securing himself some silverware in the process, and he would help the club usher in the likes of Bernardo Silva, Fabinho, Mbappe. A lot of the young talent that Monaco had at their disposal got a lot of help from Falcao. So he was able to rescue his reputation at the club those last couple of seasons, but even then, it was still well and truly established that Falcao was nowhere near the player he was before. His last great season would be that 16-17 season, which was actually the follow-up from the Chelsea campaign, where he was able to at least register those 30 goals across all competitions, and from there it was just a gradual decline. He was never ever really able to recapture that best striker in the world moniker, and it's really a damn shame. And he would go on to keep playing. He'd have some good seasons for Galatasaray in Turkey and Rayo Vallecano in Spain, but even then, at that point, you're playing for clubs which people respect to an extent, but are not considered anywhere near top level football. So he still had the respect of fans and respect of many because he was still playing football. He was doing it at a high level in Europe, but just not for the clubs he realistically would have been at had that ACL tear never happened. And eventually, Falcao would find himself where he is now, playing back in Colombia for Millonarios, the club where he would spend some time training at very early early on in his career, more or less going in a full circle back to Colombia, where we can probably expect that a 38-year-old Radamel Falcao is probably bound to retire pretty soon. So the career of Radamel Falcao has been a very interesting. You had this young Colombian prospect who wasn't necessarily tearing the world up, but once he did get his opportunity, he did not look back. Great seasons with Porto, great seasons with Atletico Madrid, back-to-back Europa League champion, phenomenal goal scorer, just one of the best strikers in the world for about a 3 to 4 year span. And unfortunately for him, it all came crashing down. But the story of Falcao is really a great one. The guy deserves his flowers, damn it. He was the best striker in the world in the very early 2010s, so he deserves that credit at least. Had he played at bigger clubs, let's say for example Real Madrid instead of Atletico Madrid, there's no telling how much more silverware he would have, but ultimately still a great career, a career that definitely deserves a little bit more attention, because realistically the guy is an icon of football. He's not a streets won't forget player, but he's not the GOAT either. He's somewhere in between.